Hello Team FD and welcome back to Sunday Vibes. No Joseph Tomlinson today, stepping in for the Carrots. It's the one and only Dougie Critchley. Slightly moist, why is that, mate?
Yeah, the heavens opened. We forgot the extension pack, so I had to run through, and it was quite biblical on me, just everywhere.
Taking one for the team, and as always, Patrick's here.
Yeah, hi.
Looking absolutely piff in navy.
Cheers.
You should wear it more often. Handsome devil. First question comes from @Timstar_, 2 underscores actually, a bit rogue, 18. Which team has had the biggest drop off from last season to this one? It's a good question. I think we start with Mauricio Pochettino's Tottenham because they're currently 7th with 8 points from 6 games, Patrick.
Yeah, I think the Premier League over the first few weeks has had like a few different tiers towards the top of it. And I think, you know, there's like obviously City and Liverpool who are great. And then below that, I think there's been Chelsea, United and Leicester who've all been pretty good. And then below that, there've been Arsenal and Spurs who've been pretty bad. Still better than most of the league, but with Spurs, it just feels like, you know, their new signings haven't really bedded in yet, so they're still dealing with some of the midfield thinness from last season, and now they've got extra thinness at forward and, of course, at right back, which is hilarious given what an amazing start to life Kieran Trippier has had in at Atletico Madrid.
Most passes into the final third for them.
Yeah, he's just pinging crosses left and right. I think he's got the most final third entries, the most chances created, I think. But Spurs have not been great so far. However, I think that part of the reason that we're down on them is they obviously had a really, really bad result against Newcastle, but the Leicester one, I think it's because we underrate Leicester. I think at the end of the season, we'll have a much better idea of how good Leicester are, and then we'll say, well, you know what, actually losing away at Leicester is not that crazy a result. Plus, with Spurs more than any other team, I'm waiting for them to get good as opposed to waiting for them to get bad. With United, I'm waiting for there to be a serious drop-off when they play a better side. I think that they will struggle when they get key injuries. Obviously, they've had a couple so far. I think that that'll be a problem for them, especially over Christmas. Chelsea, similarly, I do think that Chelsea's lack of experience, both managerially and player-wise, will bite them at some point, even though I think their young players are very good. Arsenal, I suppose I'm waiting to get better. But with Spurs, it's more that I just think every season they have a period where they look really, really ropey. And every season Mauricio Pochettino manages to find a way to get the best out of his team and sort of eliminate the worst.
Well, entering his 6th season now, isn't he? But I suppose the slightly more concerning thing is that they limped into 4th place last season, almost gifted a Champions League place by Arsenal, who just couldn't buy a victory towards the end of the campaign. And it's now 8 wins from the last 26 games, Dougie, and the defence is looking a little bit ragged, as Pat touched upon there.
Yeah, I mean, it's worrying that it's carried on it's pretty much since March last year. And, you know, they scraped into 4th, but they also lost a lot of league games. I think they lost 13, which was absolutely crazy. They only really got 4th because of the benefits of no draws. It was either sort of losses or wins. But this year, the big change this year that I feel with Spurs is the sort of rumblings of discontent behind the scenes. In the last couple of years, there seemed to be quite a happy camp, but I actually think they're now paying the price for that year, 18 months or so of not really investing enough in the squad. Because it seems like they overachieved last year in the Champions League, reached that final, and if they'd won that, it's stupid to put it all on that one game, but it really feels like a lot of their big players would have been like, great, we finally achieved something with Spurs, we don't need to leave. Whereas in the last 6 to 12 months, Alderweireld wants to leave, Danny Rose has wanted to leave, Christian Eriksen now wants to leave. Jan Vertonghen was out the side earlier this season. There was talk about it, speculation that he might want to leave as well.
Well, after the latest Premier League fixture, he said, we need to address the personal agendas in the squad, don't we? And it's not just that people thought that Champions League would propel them to greater heights. I think Eriksen thought Real Madrid would come in for him to an extent. Yeah. But Danny Rose was pushing for a move to Watford, wasn't he?
Yeah, supposedly on the final day. I don't know quite how much truth there was, but there was talk of him going to the training ground, trying to force a move there. So it's kind of strange. And then we talk about their great summer in bringing in Giovanni Lo Celso and Ndombele, but Ndombele's missed quite a few. I think he missed 3 games before this weekend. I think Giovanni Lo Celso hasn't been able to start a game, or at least played very little part in it. And then they lost Fernando Llorente up front, so they haven't had to deal with that yet. But if Kane picks up another injury, it's a lot of pressure on Son. With Ali out as well, they've had sort of a stretched squad, and their decision to get rid of Trippier in the summer has come back to bite them, with Foyt then getting injured. Serge Aurier and Walker Peters, I don't think either of them are probably able to bring you to the level of challenging Liverpool and Man City. So I think it's just another season of being 3rd or 4th. To be honest, I don't think they'll be, I think I'm kind of with Pat, I think they'll recover There's the green shoots of recovery in some of their performances. They just haven't been able to put it together for a full 90. And as Pat says, there's really no shame in losing to this Leicester side. Leicester ran Man United very close the previous weekend in what was quite a drab affair on the Football Social that we watched. But there are no mugs, Leicester, and they deserve to be where they are, I think.
Yeah, I mean,
They've had a tough schedule as well.
I think expected goals had that Leicester game down in Spurs' favour. Of course, doesn't account for chances missed, of which Leicester generated quite a few. I think Leicester ran out deserved victors in the end. And we kind of I was quite bullish about Leicester breaking into the top 6 before the start of the season. But to kind of really cause Spurs any trouble, you'd imagine they'd have to break into the top 4. And that's probably beyond them at this point without any sort of support up front after Jamie Vardy. Who's coming into form of late, I guess. But they're conceding around 16 shots, Spurs now. And we were discussing off camera before this, the various formations they could play to potentially bring Ali back. And the biggest criticism that seems to be levelled at Ali, apart from his inconsistencies after his injuries, is that he's not the 16-17 Ali that scored 18 league goals. When, if he's brought back in, could it be in a different role as opposed to kind of contributing the final third? And with everyone fit, who do you play and why to sort of, pick up their season?
I think that you don't necessarily have to have a guaranteed starting 11. Like Pochettino hasn't really been like that, right? And the great thing about their midfielders now is that most of them can do multiple things. Like he's played Eriksen in central midfield before. Obviously Ndombele can play a more attacking role, can sit deeper. Lo Celso can play anywhere between 6 and 10. I do think that their midfield will have a higher ceiling if they take Winks out of it, just because the other players are so much better.
One player Lo Celso deeper.
Yeah,
and Ndombele is the 8, and
I just think that the thing about Winks is like people like him or whatever, but there are a lot of games where it just passes him by, particularly in the Leicester game. There were 3 or 4 times where James Maddison just beat him about 5 yards outside the box. And if you are the sitting midfielder on a team, you can't be getting beaten by the number 10 in that position again and again and again. And every time it resulted in a big chance. And eventually it resulted in Maddison scoring. I think that's a real issue for them in that position. So I don't know. To me, I think their best side still includes Eriksen. Whether Poch feels like he can play him there in every single game, I don't really know. But I actually think, I think that the narrative around Ali has kind of got out of control. I thought he started last season really, really well, actually. He was still doing a lot of the creative stuff he was doing before, but far more midfield ball progression, far more defensive work. And I don't know, some injuries have been a problem for him since. And you were saying off camera beforehand that to a certain extent, people are always going to be down on him because they're always going to think about his great goal scoring seasons and think that any season where he doesn't score as many goals represents a decline. And I don't think that's necessarily true. But yeah, I guess to me, like, I just try and get as many of their good players on the pitch as possible. And that means playing less Sissoko, playing less Wanyama and playing less Winks.
Yeah, what would you make of that, Diggy? How do you kind of arrest the slump that Tottenham are going through at the moment? Of course, we're not asking for all the answers, otherwise you'd be employed by Tottenham Hotspur.
There we go.
Weird
No,
name,
but I do enjoy a combined 11. I'd probably play a 4-2-3-1 with Ndombele alongside Giovanni Lo Celso at the base. Lo Celso sort of more option to run forward there. I think they've got a good enough defenders when on form to cover their sort of, not even defensive shortcomings, but they're both so well-rounded in midfield they can do a bit of everything.
Yeah.
And then behind Kane, I play Son on the left, Ali in the hole, or maybe potentially Eriksen in the hole and Ali on the right, or Eriksen on the right behind Kane. And I think that's a pretty solid side. I think that's easily the third best side in the Premier League. And I expect them to pick up points. It's just a slightly worrying start. And
particularly away from home. Haven't won away from home since January 20th, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't really afford to drop too many points, especially with the narrative around them at the moment. The media are really on their backs. Obviously lost to Colchester in the League Cup this week, which doesn't help. So effectively, unless they're going to win the Champions League, they've got to win the FA Cup to win a trophy. It's difficult to see how that squad disharmony gets better because they're paid about half that of what they could be earning in other places, and they're not winning trophies. So Pochettino's got a big ask on his hands.
And they've got issues with people like Kane as well. Like you said, the defence has been bad for a while. But I know that people really don't like this idea that Kane has declined, but he has declined. Like he's still, people are kind of texting.
His shots are getting closer to 3 than 4, right?
Oh, they're way below. Like, I mean, this is the thing. The first game of this season has brought him up a lot because he had like 7 shots against Villa. But since then, his shot numbers have been poor. And I mean, even against Olympiacos, he had 2 shots. Like, these are troubling numbers for Harry Kane. Like, there was a time when he was getting 5 shots a game and he was a 0.8, 0.9 expected goals per match striker. He's now down at like below 0.5 most of the time.
We don't see that as an issue.
Really troubling.
With progression, that he's dropping deeper, that maybe he's racking up more passes.
But even still, like, it doesn't really matter if he's not doing the other stuff, like, because nobody else is picking up the slack. Like, if he's dropping deeper in a sort of Firmino way, like, well, not Firmino this season, but Firmino previously, in order to create goal-scoring opportunities for the guys around him, you expect to see them get more goal-scoring opportunities. But he's just shooting less. He just isn't getting as many shots anymore. And when he's through on goal, he can still produce amazing finishes. I mean, his goal against Leicester was sensational.
Yeah, it was awesome.
And then I had people tweeting at me saying, how can you say Kane's in decline when he can do this? Well, Ronaldo can still do amazing things, but nobody's going to pretend that he's the player he was 5 years ago. And I do think injuries have taken a toll on Harry Kane. So they need to think about how to get the best out of him, because these are not the shot numbers. He's now a good Premier League striker. His numbers are those of a good Premier League striker as opposed to a very good one.
I'd still say his goal scoring record, his numbers are still that of like the 5th or 6th best striker in the league.
Yeah, but that's quite a big decline from when I think he was probably the best striker.
He was probably number 2.
And
maybe.
also, I think if you take penalties out, then there's a significant decline even on that. Like, you think about the other teams around them now, and you think, okay, I'm not going to say that Abraham's better than Kane, but at the moment he's more prolific. Aubameyang is better than Kane.
Yeah.
Aguero is better than Kane.
I'd say Aguero,
Liverpool probably have
Firmino,
3 players who are better than Kane.
Yeah, Aguero, Firmino, and Aubameyang clearly better. But then Kane's, I think, the 4th best probably. He's still ahead of Rashford in my book.
Is he ahead of Vardy though? Like, I mean, I think do I think he's a better player overall? Maybe. But if I just put one of them in an elite team now and said who's going to score more goals, I honestly don't know who it would be. I really don't.
I'm kind of with Chris. I think he is so much more capable. He's so much more of he's less used as just an out-and-out target man these days, and does drop a lot deeper, brings Son into play, brings others into play. And I'd still think I'd back Kane to have a better impact on the Spurs team. Not necessarily better goals, but better impact on the Spurs team than Vardy.
Sure, but I guess it's more about what his role is. Like, I do see him dropping deep, but he was actually dropping deep last season and the season before as well. Like, and now I think people focus on that because he's not doing the thing he used to do so well. And yeah, if he's dropping deeper, I want to see a corresponding uptick from the guys around him. If I'm not seeing that, then I say stop dropping deep and score some goals.
But they are down as a whole, aren't they? I don't know about his key passes are down, but I don't know what his kind of second assist are like. So it might be quite a harsh criticism to level at him that, you know, that people aren't finishing the moves that he's starting, because I do think his passing is underrated. He's an excellent distributor. But those key relationships that he had with the likes of Christian Eriksen, with the likes of Dele Alli, aren't there anymore. And we do have to take that into account. Like, Son is a very sort of good, if not direct, kind of creator come forward from out wide. Like, I don't see. He doesn't have that same relationship with Son that he had with Christian Eriksen. And when Christian Eriksen's shots are down, when his key passes are down, when his relationship with Pochettino is down, I do think that's going to have an adverse effect on Harry Kane. And maybe Lo Celso returning at 10, or maybe Ali returning at 10, really helps him out in that regard. Maybe we do see his shots creep closer to 4 per night as opposed to the 3.3 that they're currently on. I don't want to count him out yet, and I sort of don't want to agree that his time as an elite number 9 are gone, but those injuries definitely have taken a toll. But I think we're probably set to enjoy another couple of years of 20 plus goals, you know, in a season.
He didn't get 20 last season
just yet,
and he gets injured a lot now. Like, I think we will look back at Harry Kane in a few years' time and we will say the best time was when he was kind of 23, 24.
But I think he can adjust his game. Maybe it's just to predominantly operate in the penalty area. I think Harry Kane's one of his biggest downfalls that he does want to do everything. Like, when you see him 30 yards from the box, like pinging a diagonal ball over to, you know, the overlapping right back, you're like, okay, that's great and it looks great and we know you can do that, but why aren't you just hovering in and around the 18-yard box?
That was never a problem before, though. You know, like, this is the thing. I kind of agree that, like, if we just think he's a really good finisher, but he maybe doesn't quite have the mobility he used to have, then I agree, like, they should be finding a way to keep him close to goal.
Because his heading's also fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, though,
and his hold-up play in the box, his link-up play is decent.
He also used to score a lot of goals from around the edge of the box. Like I don't think he's dropping any deeper than he used to, really. He gets maybe a little bit more, he wants to get a bit more involved in play, but that's because he's just doing I think he's not as good at finding space in the final third as he used to be.
I think he's as good a finisher as Aubameyang, but maybe isn't quite as adept
better
at finding that space.
He's probably a better finisher than Aubameyang, but yeah, Aubameyang can do more. Like Aubameyang last season was one of our most important outlets. He's great in ball progression as well. Like he's amazing at finding space in the final third, and he's quick. You know, whereas Kane, he was never fast, but what he was great at is taking a shot a little bit earlier than the keeper expected. Finding that extra yard of space that the defender didn't think he had. Like he was really good at that. And snapshots from the edge of the box with both feet. And that's the stuff that started to fall away.
I think this is the season that will, if at the end of the year, I think we could maybe put last year down as a down year, coming off a World Cup, really intense World Cup for him. Went a long way in that tournament, very little rest, and then went into a big, intense Premier League season. Plays a lot of games. If the numbers are the same this year, then maybe we could say something more substantial. But before this season started, he has the best goals per game ratio in Premier League history, along with Aguero. He was 0.69. So I think it's too early to just rule him out as
a little bit premature, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it does. You're right. It does correspond. I mean, even his form in that World Cup declined pretty rapidly, didn't it? Which suggests that the physical demands that are currently put on him are too high, or were too high during that period. I don't know about his off season, but it's just a shame that a slight dip on his behalf has come at the same time, simultaneous as Spurs kind of not falling off a cliff, but just all round being much, much poorer. I mean, talking of much, much poorer, Wolves and Manchester United. I mean, let's talk about Manchester United very briefly. Joe's not here, so we don't have to kind of, go over the top on them. But they're down on my list. I think expected points has them as the kind of second in the Premier League, which suggests they've been extremely lucky at the start of this campaign. And their defence is sort of fourth or fifth best. We spoke about this before. However, what we haven't really covered in any great depth is their forward line. And now the onus has been put on Mason Greenwood to score, or to be an adept backup striker. Now, Rashford is what, injured for a random.
They haven't announced how long.
They don't know exactly how long.
Okay, for an undefined amount of time. Like, do we see? Do you still hold the same sort of opinion of Manchester United now as you did at the start of the campaign? Now we're kind of 6 games deep.
I kind of do, to be honest. I never thought they were the finished article. I actually predicted that they would finish 5th before the season started. I'm not sure I'm ready to change that, either up or down at the moment.
That's quite a good prediction.
I don't think. I sort of hammered them at the end of the window in letting Lukaku and Sanchez go without a backup coming in. It was all sort of the basic arguments. It wasn't rocket science. And now, halfway into the first quarter of this season, or halfway into the first third. Anyway, forget the maths. They've been without Pogba for large periods. They've obviously been without Martial. They had Jesse Lingard having to come on up front, and who hasn't scored or assisted a goal outside of the month of December since the start of May 2018. So,
well, I suppose the concerning thing was the defence was great before that, before they played West Ham, and then they were beat by West Ham pretty convincingly, and it was like, well, okay. I mean, if the defence isn't going to retain its kind of Champions League status and being one of the 4 best in the league, I mean, then that's kind of emphasises the issues with the forward line, right? And they could find themselves rapidly falling down the table, or staying in this period of mediocrity. What do you kind of make of their recent exploits?
I think they're quite a lot better this season than they were last season, to be honest. I don't think they've had the rub of the green so far. Like, they've got a good attack. They've got a very good defence currently. It hasn't been particularly tested. It'll be interesting to see whether Arsenal can do that. But certainly when they play
Monday, big game.
Certainly when they play, City and Liverpool, that will happen. And I think they must be the only team in the top 6 not to have played either City or Liverpool right now. Though Leicester haven't either, have they?
Leicester have played. Oh no.
Yeah, Leicester haven't played City or Liverpool either. So that's an interesting kind of factor for both those teams, because it does tend to really skew your shot numbers and XG early this season. I don't know, the defence, I still can't work out why it's good. I think Maguire's been fine. I think Wan-Bissaka's been excellent.
Lindelof's been improved, I think, in my opinion.
It's not really, it's quite, basically they're defending by keeping the ball. Most of the time they defend by keeping the ball, and then occasionally they're like, Wan-Bissaka, go and get the ball back, and he does it, because he's amazing at it. The attack, I still think there are big weaknesses there, and Pogba coming back will help a lot, but generally speaking, United look way more coherent than they looked last season, and my primary concern with them really is squad depth. I do think that when you get into the weeds, January, that's the time when injuries start to bite. And I think that at that point, if one of these injuries is really long term, they will be in serious, serious trouble, because then you're looking at a front line of, some combination of Mata, Lingard, Greenwood, like Tahith Chong, Pereira. Pereira's been dreadful so far. And I still think the midfield it can be got at. McTominay is just a guy. Fred is obviously pretty much an exile. Pogba injured at the moment, just coming back, but never exactly going to stitch your whole midfield together.
Okay.
And Matic, 1,000 years old and dreadful.
Let's talk very briefly then about Monday's game, because of course, we filmed this a little bit earlier in the week. The game is happening tomorrow, Monday Night Football. Let's have some predictions. How do you feel going into the game? Arsenal's chances against Manchester United, because both teams are a little bit vulnerable at the moment.
Yeah, I'd put Arsenal as favourites, definitely.
Even at Old Trafford?
Even at Old Trafford. I think they can definitely they can definitely cause that back line more issues than they've been tested so far. I think their midfield has the potential, if it's Matic, McTominay and Pereira or Mata, to dominate that game if they play at the strength that they can do. But yes, they had a dodgy result against Watford. We've been over that. Yes, they didn't play particularly well against Villa, but they got out of that hole. They had a really good result midweek against Nottingham Forest, although albeit against Nottingham Forest. And some of their young players have looked really exciting at the start of this year. Like Saka played well in the Europa League, played well in the Carabao Cup. I'm not suggesting he'll start, but it's going to be difficult to drop him after
Started
some
against
minutes.
Villa.
Started against Villa.
It's a false dawn, mate.
It's a false dawn,
this little bit of a recovery for me. I think Manchester United are favourites.
When I've watched Man United this season, so far they've affected. The overriding emotion I have is boredom. I actually haven't found them particularly entertaining to watch.
Well, a lot of teams have sat against them, haven't they? To be
True.
fair.
But the overriding emotion when I watch Arsenal is nervousness. They just make me nervous, and I'm not even an Arsenal fan. Just whenever people run through that midfield at will, with Xhaka possibly having the worst start to a season that he's had at Arsenal, which is saying quite something. I really think he has been exceptionally poor. It just makes me nervous running at David Luiz, running at Socrates, who again was at fault for one of the Villa goals at the weekend. Xhaka just letting Jack Grealish run through to then cross for Wesley. They're just basic errors. But I think there'll be goals, but I put Arsenal as favourites.
But you're right in that Xhaka, his 2.6 defensive actions, that's tackles and interceptions, are kind of pale in comparison at this point to the likes of McTominay, to the likes of Jorginho. Jorginho always described as, too lightweight for the Premier League, and Scott McTominay derided as not top 4 quality. So he has had, even those underlying numbers show quite clearly a stinking start to the season. However, I do think that the system does him no favours in that Emery's kind of opted for variations of the diamond and played him by himself at the base of midfield. And there's been a few times when it's kind of morphed into a 4-3-3, and he's kind of had Guendouzi on one side and Willock or Ceballos. And Guendouzi's kind of doing everything at the moment, like decent defensive numbers, decent ball progression. But Xhaka is just not athletic enough to defend that back four to the degree where they're going to get back into the top 4. Patrick, I would have Manchester United down as favourites purely because of your kind of defensive frailties. I do think United are a much more well-rounded proposition. But if Bellerin and Tierney come back, is it a different game? Could it be?
I think if Arsenal played their first choice 11, our team would be better than United in probably every department. But we won't. If Tierney's fully fit, if Bellerin's fully fit, if Torreira plays, I think it's quite clearly a better side than United. I don't think United's midfield is genuinely bad. Their attack isn't great, and their defence is reliant on pretty much 1.5 guys. So I don't know. But the thing is, a top 6 side, at home, the home side should always be favoured in these games, really, unless they're playing City or Liverpool. And Arsenal are not sufficiently. If Arsenal are better than United, which there's not a lot of evidence for that at the moment, I think that going away still changes that. Ferguson used to talk about this endlessly, about his team's results away versus his team at home. And he was like, away, we look like a mediocre side, but at home, we're the best team in the country. And I do think that will be a factor. However, I do think a lot of this stuff is solvable with personnel. I think
I'd be surprised if Tierney didn't start.
After, especially as it'll have been almost a week.
I was about to say
since he
Tuesday
played.
to Monday.
Yeah, exactly.
So after that Forest game, you actually came into the office and you were bouncing because you'd
You're on
watched
cloud nine.
some of
Well, just
Arsenal's
fun.
youngsters play. You'd won 5-0. You clearly enjoyed the game. So what was it in that game where that suggested some of these youngsters? It's time for Unai Emery to kind of place his trust in them.
Well, he started Saka against Villa, and I think that was probably a good move. Like, Saka looks excellent so far, but it's not so much about that. It's more that, like, Tierney at left back is a big upgrade on Kolasinac. Holding is an upgrade on certainly Socrates. I'd play him over Socrates. Bellerin, I actually think Maitland-Niles has been pretty good. I think he was unlucky to be sent off the other day. But Bellerin will be obviously an improvement there. And actually, Chambers had a great game. But really, to me, the key is Torreira. I think if you want a lot of defensive output, then you play Torreira and Ceballos, who are the two players in that midfield who have put up outstanding defensive numbers in the past. Xhaka never has. Guendouzi hasn't yet either. Though their defensive numbers are always going to look a little bit weaker because if you play in a 3, it kind of gets shared between 3 rather than shared between 2. But I think that you have to kind of do that given that your forwards are not going to defend a huge amount. Like, Pepe doesn't really defend much. Aubameyang can press, but he's not always going to tackle back in the way Lacazette would. And the loss of Iwobi is a real problem because Iwobi was extremely hard working on the left flank, like genuinely a really good defensive forward last season. So I think, I don't know, if we ran out the lineup I wanted us to, I would look at the teams on paper and think, yeah, we should win that game. And we dominated this game last season. We should have beaten them away, and then we beat them at home. But it's just always extremely tough to call when you go to Old Trafford, and for some reason Man United always manage to just stop us beating them, usually by luck, usually by virtue of defensive mistakes.
Not had an awful lot of luck this season, Manchester United, so maybe the luck will shine on them in this fixture. However, when you're playing a defence that concedes 18 shots a game in the form of Arsenal, and everyone's seen the stat by now, conceded 96 shots in the first 5 games of the season, I think there could be real fireworks in this game, to be perfectly frank, as long as kind of United's forward line is fit. Of course, the question remains over Rashford. I would also play Torreira in defensive midfield in this game, just because of some of the mobility. They've been relatively ineffective, but the mobility of some of Manchester United's midfield, Jesse Lingard in particular, picking up those good pockets of space. Torreira, 4 tackles and interceptions in his last season at Sampdoria, and then just not used as a defensive midfielder this time round.
Well, 4 last season as well at Arsenal, even though he was being kind of like switched between like deep midfield and a kind of box-to-box role. Like he always does that, and more importantly, he's press resistant and he will lead a press himself. Like, he's just extremely good at getting around midfield, even though actually Xhaka is quite athletic. Like, we don't think he is because his acceleration is so bad, but when he gets up to speed, he's quite quick. Torreira is really slow, but Torreira's anticipation is so much better that it's almost never a factor. I think, though, it's one of those games that if our midfield did turn up, which is perfectly possible, then we could win it. Because when I look at the midfields, at the start of this season, I think the standout player in across both midfields is Guendouzi. And if I'm then looking at the second best midfielder across both midfields, it's probably Ceballos. I
didn't have a great game against Villa though, Ceballos.
He didn't play the whole game against Villa, but
I also think he does his better work from deep, and he keeps being deployed kind of as an 8 come 10, doesn't he? Like he
is an 8 though, really.
Yeah,
I mean,
but I'd like to see him play a little bit more against Aston Villa. When your backs were against the wall, so to speak, you did see him start to drop deep, and he did become a little bit more influential. And it was thanks to kind of his dribbling, to his quick feet and quick thinking, that you were winning free kicks in your area. Like, he wasn't great, but he certainly helped out and kind of made up that numerical disadvantage until he got bought off. And those substitutions were just weird, and it works. So
I thought Torreira, I actually thought that worked really well. Like Torreira and Willock, who's a more attack-minded player, but suddenly they were buzzing around midfield, and we were just able to pick up all the second balls. Like, I mean, I think that Ceballos has still been really good for us so far. I think that he will probably be excellent for us this season. It's just that Guendouzi's been really, really good to start with. But I don't know. I think a lot of the time we've conceded a lot of shots because Emery is naturally conservative. Like, his team either attacks or defends. They never really do both like a team should do. And so against Watford, we were 2-0 up at half-time, and Emery was kind of like, right, we're going to defend. And his way of defending is to say, you can have the ball, we're going to drop deep. And that's just a horrible fit for Arsenal's talent. Arsenal's talent are much better suited to saying, the way we're going to defend is by keeping possession, which is what United do. And so if United's defensive scheme is we're going to keep the ball all the time, the question will be, can Arsenal get it off them?
Yeah.
To Arsenal, if they're like, you can have the ball and like basically attack us and then we'll try and win it and counter-attack you, it's just going to result in their defence making mistakes because their personnel aren't
Weird
good
to
enough.
see Arsenal invite the pressure when they've actually not
It's
got
so
the
strange.
defensive nous to deal with it.
If they just kept the ball against Watford, they probably would have been fine. But instead, they were like, you know what? We're going to sit deep and try and spring our guys on the counter. And they did that against Liverpool as well when it worked horribly. I don't know why they tried it again in an away game.
And when you're inviting pressure, it's not like you were winning the ball in midfield and sort of even kind of maintaining possession in your half. It was 2 banks of 4 in your box. Watford had like 61 touches inside Arsenal's box, and it was like, the way we deal with this is just by clearing it and then thinking about defending it the next time it comes back. Rather than kind of deploying any system. Okay, let's go to the continent very briefly then, because we don't want to be accused of just covering Premier League football, although that's kind of what Football Daily does. Go over to Euro Football Daily if you want to check out the Premier League football. Continental Club would have gone live on Friday. Did I say European football? Hopefully I did. Do we want to start in La Liga then? Because it's kind of been a tumultuous start to the season for the big clubs. Real Madrid, as of the time of recording, are back at the top of the league after beating Osasuna. Vinicius Junior scoring. He's kind of, again, one of their bright lights the last 2 years. But Barcelona, lads.
Well, it's not been great, really. I mean, they sit 5th. They're 4 points off Real Madrid, which doesn't sound disastrous, but Real Madrid have also shown a bit of fallibility at the start of this year as well, despite the fact they're unbeaten and top of La Liga, as we said. But prior to beating Villarreal in midweek, thanks to an awesome Arthur goal. If you haven't seen that, go check it out.
Rocket.
Absolutely amazing.
Although Santi Cazorla scored a better goal in that game.
Well, I preferred Arthur's, definitely. But prior to that game, it's their worst start to La Liga in 25 years. They've already lost twice. They lost 3 times in the whole of last year. They didn't lose after the end of November in the league. So there's definitely not been a good start for Barcelona. They're 5th for shots per game, they're 8th for shots conceded per game. And yes, they've had injury issues. They obviously haven't been able to play at all really with Messi. I think he's only played just over 90 minutes. Suarez has come back from injury as well and looked very poor against Villarreal. Lots of the attacks were sort of stopping at his feet. And that sort of telepathy that he's got going with Messi over the last couple of years obviously hasn't come to
Dembele
fruition.
looked quite productive.
He did. But I was reading quite a few reports after the game, and lots of the Spanish journalists were saying that Dembele, whilst when he gets the ball, fantastic, but his off-the-ball movement is not good enough. He stays quite wide most of the time, rather than making these angled runs in behind, which would be so effective with his pace and finishing
Not like the
ability.
Spanish press to beat up on Dembele, though, after a decent performance.
True. But they're always asking for more out of a player that has so much more potential. But yeah, they've had their issues in their injuries. I also don't think their pre-season really helped. They played in 3 continents in 13 days with a pretty skeletal squad because lots of their players were off at the Copa America. Then they focused on getting Neymar in all summer, saying basically to Semedo, Rakitic and Dembele that they were sort of surplus to requirements and open to a loan, which what's that going to do to their confidence and squad harmony? And 3 games in La Liga out of the 6, they failed to produce over 0.7 expected goals in that single game. So their attack just really isn't working. And Griezmann's numbers have taken a hit quite dramatically from last year at Atleti, which is pretty much the opposite of what everyone expected. And their bright light in attack has been a 16-year-old Ansu Fati, who, whilst playing phenomenally well, is pretty worrying for Barcelona that they're so over-reliant on Ansu Fati. And they've scored 14 goals, which is pretty good, but they've also conceded 10. And the composition of their midfield hasn't worked very well. I think Valverde's played 5 different formations and 5 different sort of combinations of personnel in the first 6 games. That can't be very helpful when you're trying to bed in a Frankie de Jong. Busquets has played pretty poorly in parts as well. Well,
they looked much better against Villarreal when Frankie de Jong actually came on, didn't they? Which is Kelso
and he's played well. He linked up really well with Ansu Fati in the game before the one against Granada. I can't remember who it was against. So there's like green shoots of recovery there. And to only be 4 points behind, having played so poorly, is actually quite promising. But worrying times for Valverde. And it seems like
their away form, isn't it?
Their away form
has been awful.
They haven't won in 8, but their home form, they've only lost 1 of their last sort of 50-odd games I think they've lost twice at home since he took over. So that is quite impressive. And as soon as that changes, then you'll see the Camp Nou crowd go against him. But at the moment, it seems like it's slightly sort of turning against him.
Very interesting stuff. Have we got any sort of other answers from across Europe's top 5 leagues?
Atalanta's league form's been quite up and down.
I think they've been
As is
unlucky.
their Champions League form.
They've been unlucky though. Like
They did beat Roma in the week.
They actually do look like statistically pretty good, and I think Bayern actually look incredible. I think Bayern have had a really good start to the season. Like after that first game, like Bayern actually look very, very good currently. And Dortmund are good as well, Leipzig as well. Like pretty much nobody's really massively underperforming in that league out of those guys anyway.
PSG had that slip up against Rennes, but have been pretty dominant since.
Lost last night.
Yeah, they lost to Rennes.
Last night. So they've lost 2 games now, which is pretty much unheard of for them.
Oh, Rennes and Rennes.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
But did look phenomenal in that game against Real Madrid. Sorry. So it's sort of a bit inconsistent at the moment, and they've got a lot of players out as well, which will come back to bite them at certain points. But that performance against Real Madrid was excellent.
Yeah, let's wrap it up there then and move on to quickfire questions. But before that, if you're not subscribed to the channel, click subscribe and turn notifications on right now so you never miss an episode of Sunday Vibes. Let's move on. Leading the charge then is at Gunnar JHH. Should Arsenal attempt to get someone like Marcelino now or wait until the end of the season and try for Allegri? Presumably, he is done with Unai Emery. As an Arsenal fan, how would you chop and change, who's leading the club at the moment, or do you wait? How much longer do you give Emery, in fact?
Yeah, you give him another couple of weeks. Like you see if things improve, like once he gets his personnel back. Like if Tierney comes into the team, Bellerin, Holding, or he starts playing Torreira and everything kind of starts to pick up, which is what you'd expect, then you think, okay, fair enough, let's see how it goes. If he doesn't do those things, or if those guys come back and they still look as bad as they have the first few weeks of the season, then I think I'd 100% look for a change. I mean, on the other hand, I wouldn't give the job on a permanent basis to someone like Marcelino. I think he's a really good coach, but I would give it to him till the end of the season, which I think actually probably be willing to accept given some of the ways he's left jobs in the last few years. It's weird though that I think to talk about Allegri. Like Allegri's obviously the big name who's available, but when they hired Emery, they made a big point that they thought they were going to get a guy who was an attacking manager. And while they were obviously wrong about that, it's something they want to do. And Allegri does not have that reputation, and rightly he doesn't have a reputation for being an attacking coach. I think they're much more likely in the summer to go for somebody like Tuchel if he's available.
Allegri certainly doesn't concede 18 shots a game though, does he? And probably gets just as much out of your attack as he does now, as Unai Emery is now.
I think anyone gets as much out of the attack, yeah. But that said, I mean, Allegri's defence was pretty bad last season in Italy. Like, Juve had a pretty big drop-off last year and it's continued this year. But yeah, Allegri's obviously an improvement, but I don't really see Arsenal going for him unless they basically are saying like, okay, right, Emery was the transition guy and now we no longer are going to care about, the kind of quote unquote like Arsene Wenger football, like Arsenal way, whatever you want to call it. Like they're going to, I think it would be fine to do that, but in that case, I just think we should have hired Conte.
Yeah. There's just been no progress under Emery, has there? And I think he is starting to walk a tightrope in that, they conceded 51 goals last season, which is a joint high. And then at the start of this season, they're just as porous. There is defensive personnel to come back, but if they slot in and it's just as bad, then only the system is to blame. And I think at Arsenal, he's got away with it for quite some time, the kind of tendency to blame individuals or pin losses on individual errors. I mean, Arsenal have made 14 since he came in, which is 2 more than any other side. And he's got to take his share of the blame for that, not just Mustafi or Socrates. I'm going to pitch a different question to you.
Sure.
So if Pochettino was to leave in the coming weeks, if these rumblings kind of manifest into something a little bit more diabolical, which, as much as Pochettino's constantly reinvented Spurs, like Klopp had an awful 7th season at Dortmund, only Ferguson really reinvented himself, 3, 4, 5 times. Like, this would probably be the second time Poch has had to do that. If he doesn't want to do that, if that's beyond him at this point and he wants to go to a different club, if you were Poch's advisor, where would you say to hold out for?
Probably Man United.
Why?
Because I think you can do more. The possibility of success in the next 10 years is higher at Man United than Spurs, I would argue, and higher than at Real Madrid. In many ways. I just don't think you want to take over Real Madrid at the moment. Whereas Man United, I think with the young players they've got coming through, you can see the sort of beginnings of a Pochettino side there as well. In Shaw and Rose, fairly similar players. Maguire's pretty similar to Alderweireld in lots of his skill set, long balls, able to bring the ball out of defence. I think the Pochettino to Real Madrid sort of move is sort of off the table now. I think they won't take well to have been rejected last year, which they supposedly were. And I think it's the good move to re-energise him. I can see him managing at Old Trafford one day. I think now would be the time.
Yeah, I was just surprised this morning, his 6th season. It's been a long time,
It's been a long time.
might just be time to freshen things up. Anyway, last one before we go on to personal questions. At Wood TBW said, thoughts on Bayern president Uli Hoeneß saying he'll block Bayern players from playing for Germany if Neuer is dropped.
I'm so fed up of the Bayern hierarchy. Like him and Rummenigge, they just don't help out at all. Just do your job as president and chief executive. Why are they constantly making these statements in the press? They don't help out Kovac in that way. They don't help out the team. They don't help out German football. Just keep your mouth shut. Get on with your job.
Try and stay out of prison.
Try. And why does it matter if Neuer gets dropped? He probably deserves to be. Ter Stegen has been in the top 3 goalkeepers in the world for the
Neuer's
last
not in the
3
top
years.
10 keepers in Europe.
Exactly.
Also, Uli Hoeneß just doesn't have the power. Like he can't stop Joshua Kimmich like going and playing for Germany. Kimmich is going to be like, I'm going to play for Germany.
Yeah.
Like, there's a Euros next year. There's absolutely no way that I'm going to sit out because our keeper isn't getting picked. And more importantly, it isn't like he isn't getting picked so they can play like even Bernd Leno. He's not getting picked so they can play Ter Stegen, who is probably one of the 2 best keepers in the world at the moment. Like, it's absolutely absurd. Like, Uli Hoeneß has a history of doing dumb things, and this is, well, it doesn't rank at the top, obviously, because, you know. But still, I don't know, he's a moron.
They've got 2 very good keepers in Leno and Trapp, and then they've got an outstanding one in Ter Stegen. It's time to move on.
And then a bad old one.
And it just feels like somewhat of an empty threat, doesn't it? Much like, you know, the promise to buy Leroy Sané. He's pretty bullish on that, and it never happened. So just chatting.
I mean, his leg did fall apart.
That is true, but it's been put back together now. Right, personal questions. I've not really looked at these, so Rizzo THFC, what's your opinion on the new FIFA? I mean, go check out Squad Goals over on Squad Goals if you want to know more about the new FIFA. My Fashion Revy 2, what is your worst memory of each other? I mean, it's a pretty dark way of ending an episode of Sunday Vibes, and George is looking pretty squirmish behind the camera. Maybe he picked this. Maybe some people just want to watch the world burn, and maybe George is one of those people. Worst memory?
Worst memory.
Or maybe just worst memory at Football Daily, like a time when it's been
it's
like,
not
oh,
specifically
Jesus.
you, Hamill, but do you remember those 2 flights we had to get to Bali, feeling very, very groggy, and I fell asleep pretty much in my pasta or whatever we had on the flight?
No, you finished your airplane food at like.
I woke up from that and I was like, where am I?
In less than 11 seconds. It was
And then fell
impressive.
asleep,
It was like
like-
Nunu from Teletubbies.
Yeah, that was pretty grim waking up from that, but that wasn't your fault.
Watching Doogie finish a meal as well is an experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's bad every morning when Doogie comes in with a packaged sandwich and a little carton of milk.
Egg and cress, baby. That's where it's at.
Can you ever really trust a bloke who eats a packaged sandwich in the morning? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, of course you can. That's
I
fine.
just didn't have milk at home, so went for egg and cress. It never lets you down.
So
You guys have known each other for a lot longer, though. There must have been. Have you guys ever fought?
Yeah.
Sure. It's like generic, like not generic.
Worst memory.
General
though, like-
bad moments at football daily, like trying to find
Has anyone ever dropped a camera?
trying
or
to find the
anything?
new pub. Like generally just going to the old bar when it was like full of like old drunks, loud music, when there was flies, when the toilets just start. I mean, we're very grateful for Gav, you know, for letting us use it all
Cheers,
these
Gav.
years. But it wasn't. It gained cult status, but also stunk. You know. So what else? Just
It's quite hard.
only having the 4th floor like back in the day to film on. Like, when it was just a picnic table and some newspapers
Fair,
over
the
it.
views back then.
And it used to like leak, and it used to, YouTube was slightly easier game back then.
Yeah, I remember those days, like probably every couple of weeks having to go out and do a walk like around the block because I wanted to like
some
hit
air.
somebody.
Yeah.
Oh, really? No, it's just furious. Like, because we were all, like all the channels then we were all in such close proximity, and there was no studio space, and you had interference and like people just like dicking around, and it was just like it
Not
was
good
just
for stress levels.
absolutely infuriating.
Yeah. Me and McCubbin sat beneath mould for about 6 months.
That
I
wasn't
think he
good.
got black lung. Probably not great. Probably has, will end his life prematurely.
If it wasn't already ending prematurely anyway.
But no, I mean, aside from that, it's an absolute pleasure. And,
been a joy.
That's why we're still here. That's the end of the show. A bit of a somber note, a bit of a weird note to end on. But if you enjoyed this, then subscribe to the channel. Obviously, go and watch Eurofootball Daily and Squad Goals. What is on Eurofootball Daily this week? What's your pick of the bunch?
Pick of the bunch. Go and check out Friday's Continental Club, and go watch the Scout Report as well, because they are good videos, and they're not doing so well at the moment. So go check out Scout Report.
Going for a rough patch. Podcasts?
Yeah, there will be a Games Gone Mad, I think, by the time this is out, but no Sunday Vibes Extra Time this week. Make sure that you hit us up with your suggestions for topics for Sunday Vibes Extra Time, because we do get a little bit thin from time to time, and we do want to produce the content that you want, so let us know.
Spot on. Bye.